My personal journey into human trafficking started almost 24 years ago as a 28-year-old mother, divorced with 3 children. Perhaps even earlier, as everything I've done in my life seems to have prepared me for the next step. In 1989, I joined the Lincoln, Nebraska police force and graduated from the Nebraska Law Enforcement Academy. During my 10 years as a police investigator, I specialized in child sex crimes and domestic violence. I was no stranger to evildoers and violence being perpetrated against women and children. In 1999, I would be heading off to Bosnia as an international police force task member. I certainly never expected to be terminated less than 2 years later and find myself in a foreign country fighting to save my reputation as a police officer and defend my integrity and honesty against a multi-billion-dollar United States private government contractor. Since that time, I've been standing in front of audiences around the globe describing my experiences within the United Nations mission. The film and the book have allowed me to share my findings and the stories of the victims in an effort to educate the naive and expose the injustices perpetuated both abroad and here in the United States, where injustices can only be described as a disease. This disease continues today and is destroying the very framework that was created to set the example of international law and justice. During my years as a UN human rights investigator, I observed many diverse and inexcusable acts. These acts included sexual harassment of female employees within the walls of the UN, government contractors and international aid workers who were becoming end users of pornography, strip clubs, and the facilitation of prostitution. I interviewed international police officers and international aid workers who admittedly purchased foreign women to keep at home as their girlfriends. I became aware of rape tapes being distributed by the Department of Defense contractors on military bases. I worked with Bosnian law enforcement officers who put their lives and jobs on the line when they reported cases of military and UN officials participating in the transport of young girls across international borders. I witnessed the inaction and dismissive behavior of UN officials on reports of sexual violence and sexual misconduct alleged against UN peacekeepers. I witnessed and experienced and lived the retaliation against those officials who tried to investigate and report. I listened to derogatory comments directed at the innocent who were referred to as whores of war and just prostitutes. Then I documented my findings in an email to mission officials in an attempt to educate and raise the awareness of the issue internally. I was immediately accused of being burned out, demoted, and then terminated a few months later as a final act of the United Nations and private contractor retaliation against me. A further attempt to discredit me as a police officer and honest person was brought forward when the government contractor alleged that I had falsified my timesheets. I took my employer DynCorp to task in a British employment tribunal and won my case in a unanimous decision.
I was working this story, trying to extend my story. I mean, we broke the story, and it didn't go anywhere. It did not get any traction. I mean, I talked to Colin Lynch. I asked Colin Lynch to do more stories on it. Now, there's true that there was an internet then, but we didn't have social media like we have now. And so, you still had a news cycle, a reasonable news cycle then. Now it's a continuous news cycle. It's completely different. And I could not, and Madeline was working on it, Martina Vandenberg, we were all working on it. We could not. Martina puts out this report. And Human Rights Watch generally enjoys considerably good press coverage once they put out a report. Nobody was interested. And here's my assertion. I stand by this assertion. It just didn't matter. It wasn't important. There was a devaluation of women at that time. We were dealing with bigger issues like 9/11, women in prostitution. It just didn't matter. And that's why they didn't cover it. There was a story in the Wall Street Journal in the business pages, very small mention that DynCorp, that's where Dr. Vance was asking me, that's where I saw the report that DynCorp was in trouble on gun trafficking in Latin America. It was in the business section on DynCorp. It was a huge story. It was the whole page. The whole page. It jumped from the home of the business page to inside the business section, and it was huge, and it was about 2 paragraphs max. We could not get traction. And even the fact that Kathy was terminated, it's like, okay, whatever. It just didn't matter. I honestly believe that. It just didn't matter.
I was just another disgruntled employee, and that's as far as it went. And I think if you start researching many of these government contractors, especially DynCorp, you will see just how deep the tentacles go into our government. They are, operating the Pentagon. They're operating our international security systems. They're operating our airports. I mean, just, it goes on and on. They're collecting child support in states. So, I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm not anti-government contractor. We need government contractors, but we do not need government contractors doing law enforcement functions nor judicial functions. We need professionals and people who are actually who actually aren't there to make a buck, but have a calling to do it. And let's face it, corporations are there to make money. And I think also the Project on Government Oversight and GAP have recently put out reports indicating that the original reason that we started using all these private contractors was to save our government money. And now look down the road, and it's 3 times more costly to be using government contractors than it is to be allowing either our military or our government officials to be doing the job that they're hired to do. My level of trust, honestly, with regard to the UN peacekeeping missions is limited. I believe that the general staff and staff members of the United Nations here in New York and the United Nations all over are very good people, and they're doing very hard work and have a very good heart and mean well. I think that the management within the United Nations from the highest levels has needed to be completely overhauled for decades. I think that there are continual cover-ups that take place with regard to many issues in mission areas. And for me, that is a complete slap in the face of what the United Nations is supposed to be all about. This should be about transparency and accountability and holding those individuals accountable for their wrongdoings. And I don't see that happening within the United Nations. I see individuals, just like with the private corporations, transferring those individuals around from mission to mission, just like what happened with Jacques-Paul Klein. Another interesting point that I'd like to bring up that Tanya may or may not know is Jacques-Paul Klein, although he may have been kicked out of the United Nations, is still making a great living traveling the world, doing teaching and all kinds of events at prestigious universities around the world. I think he was at Princeton for some time. This summer he came to the Netherlands in The Hague and did this wonderful, some sort of university credit program. And, it's incidents like that really bother me. The credibility of the UN, I think they have a chance. I think they have a chance at coming back. I'm proud that tomorrow I'll be at the United Nations tomorrow. I was invited to go there and do a book signing. I have no fear of the United Nations. I have no fear of speaking my mind within the walls of the United Nations. But I do still have a fear of people working for the United Nations who want to do the same thing.